everyone, I am Allison. Welcome back. I'm so glad that you chose to stop by today, and happy Pride. Since it is June, I really wanted to talk about queer books and queer authors that I really love. So I feel like in past years when I have focused on reading queer books during the month of June, that has been my singular focus. If it's queer, if it's written by a queer author, then it's great, and I don't necessarily think about intersecting marginalities. So this year I really wanted to be intentional about reading books not just by queer authors, but by queer authors who are also Black, Indigenous, or other people of color. And so I thought I would recommend to you some great YA authors who are both queer and Black, Indigenous, or people of color. And let's just jump into this list. So the first author I would like to talk about is Julian Winter, who I have loved since his debut novel, Running with Lions. And I have to tell you that, first of all, he writes contemporary young adult fiction. Most of it involves a romance. And it doesn't matter what the topic of the book is, whether he is writing about sports or working at a bookstore or a person being adopted or nerds who want to go to a comic convention. He just does it so beautifully. And there's tender moments, there's funny moments. I honestly, if I had to pick a favorite of his books to recommend, I think that I would go with How to Be Remy Cameron. But you really can't go wrong reading any of Julian Winter's books. So that is author number one. Next, I want to talk about Darcy Little Badger. She has written 2 young adult novels that are published, Alaxaway and A Snake Falls to Earth. Alaxaway has a main character who is asexual. I have not read A Snake Falls to Earth, so I am not sure if there is ace representation or not, but in both of these books, regardless of sexual orientation, she brings in a lot of Lipan Apache culture and lore, and that is a really great thing. Alaxaway is one of my favorite books that I read last year. I really liked how it was set in our world, but based on the fact that myths and legends from all different cultures were real. And I really enjoyed that it was a mystery that incorporated some fantastical elements, and there was a lot of twists and turns, and it was just really great. A Snake Falls to Earth features one character who lives on Earth and one character who lives in a different world, and when this sort of big event happens, their worlds end up colliding. And I haven't read it yet, but I am really looking forward to it. I would definitely recommend reading books by a Darcy Little Badger, both in June and all year round. So the next author that I want to recommend is Kahn. She has written 3 young adult novels, all of which have different queer representation. Let's Talk About Love, her first young adult novel, has an asexual biromantic main character, and her other young adult novels, If It Makes You Happy and The Marvelous, both feature different queer representations within different characters. She also has recently written her first adult romance novel featuring an asexual main character, which I believe is called The Romantic Agenda. And I've read all of these and enjoyed all of them. I would say if I were recommending one to you to pick up, then I would recommend The Marvelous, because it's sort of a mystery story where people are competing at this old, rambling house, and there's all sorts of hidden agendas and secret things going on, and it's more of a mystery than her other novels, which are romances or romantic comedies. Not that they're bad, I liked The Marvelous the best, but that's my personal opinion, and you can't go wrong with any of her books. Next, I want to talk about Nazimian, who, again, is another author who I've read all of the young adult novels he's written, and it doesn't matter what he writes about, it's really great. I loved The Authentics, which has more of a younger YA character, which we don't see as much, and I liked that. She has a great friend group, and she's also coming to terms with learning something big about her identity that is different. So I would say that Like a Love Story is my favorite of the books he has written for young adults. It is set during the 1980s, during the AIDS epidemic, and it is absolutely heartbreaking. the main character is sort of struggling with being gay and coming to terms with that, and he is absolutely terrified because of what is happening with the AIDS epidemic. And there is a really wonderful elder character in this book who is a great example, and unfortunately something not great is happening to him, and I don't want to say anything more, but I will say that I've told you the setting of the book, and that's all I'm going to say. It's absolutely heartbreaking. It is not a love story, but there is a lot of love in this book, and I have a lot of love for this book, and I so recommend it. And he's also written The Chandler Legacies, which just came out earlier this year, I believe, and that is a really interesting book about a group of students who come together in this writing group, and otherwise they really probably wouldn't be friends. Many of them are also queer, and a lot of them are dealing with different microaggressions and other terrible things that often happen at elite schools and are swept under the rug, and so it's just a really interesting look into that world, but through the perspective of these students who all really want to be writers. So all of those are really great books as well, and definitely pick up something by Abdi Nazimian this Pride Month. Next, I want to talk about Leah Johnson. I really hope that you have heard of her books by now. I feel like You Should See Me in a Crown especially has gotten a lot of attention. Rise to the Sun is equally good. You Should See Me in a Crown has a main character who is competing in a pageant to get college tuition money, whereas Rise to the Sun is set at a music festival and involves these two people who are strangers and meet and need to work together also to win some sort of contest, and both of them feature sapphic relationships, and I just love them both so much. You Should See Me in a Crown I think I liked a little bit more than Rise to the Sun, but as I've said, I feel like a broken record. You can't go wrong with either of her books, so highly recommend. Next, I want to talk about Aiden Thomas, who has 2 YA books that are out now and a YA fantasy coming out soon that I just absolutely cannot wait to read. So Cemetery Boys is a ghost story, but not in the traditional sense. So the main character, Yadriel, he wants to be a brujo. His family does not accept that he can be this because of his gender. And so he wants to prove to them that he can be a real brujo, and he ends up summoning a ghost who happens to be his classmate who has some unfinished business to deal with, and he has to figure out a way to get rid of him. But the more he spends time with him, the more he really doesn't want to get rid of this spirit. And there's also like something more sinister lurking beneath everything that's going on, and so there's like witchy elements and magic elements, and as I said, it's a ghost story. If you like any of those things, highly recommend. Aiden Thomas also has Lost in the Neverwoods, which is a Peter Pan retelling. It's hard to describe a genre for that one. I would say that it's contemporary with like a little bit of fantastical elements, and then he has a fantasy coming out called The Sunbearer Trials that, again, I don't know all of the details. I just know that when it was initially announced, it was compared to Raybearer, and I really loved Raybearer, so if this has anything in common with Raybearer, then I definitely want to read it. And next on the list is Emery Lee. Emery Lee has written Meet Cute Diary and Cafe Con Leche. Meet Cute Diary features a trans main character and fake dating, and it's set at camp, and it is just a wonderful like summer story. There's a great romance. The initial character who is involved in the fake dating ploy, he is kind of the worst. I don't love him, but luckily there's another romance brewing under the surface that's very sweet and very lovely, and I highly recommend that one. I haven't read Cafe Con Leche yet. It just came out a little while ago. It features enemies to lovers, which is not my favorite trope, but the main characters who are in this enemies to lovers situation are the children of rival restaurant owners, and they need to team up to work together to save both of their parents' restaurants when a third like big bad restaurant comes to town. And if they want their own personal dreams that they have to continue on, then they really need to work to save their parents' restaurants. And in order to do that, they have to team up, and it just sounds amazing, not because of the enemies to lovers aspect, but because of the restaurant aspect. Either way, I'm really looking forward to it, and I would definitely check out Emery Lee's books. Next on my list is Eric Gansworth, and he has written 2 young adult novels, I believe, If I Ever Get Out of Here and Give Me Some Truth. And while I'm not sure if there is any queer representation in those novels because I haven't read them, he's also written a young adult memoir called Apple Skin to the Core, and that is all about his identity, obviously because it's a memoir. And in addition to being Indigenous and having lived on a reservation, he is also gay, and so that is one of the things that he talks about in his memoir. So if you are looking for books to read by Indigenous queer authors, then Eric Gansworth is one who I recommend. Then we have Adipharam, and honestly, if you haven't read Darius the Great is Not Okay Yet, what are you doing with your life? I 100% loved this book about this boy who is battling depression and figuring out his identity and goes on a trip with his family to Iran to spend time with some relatives, one of whom is unfortunately dying, and there he makes a really great friend and has to sort of figure out how that fits in with his romantic feelings, and it's just so great. And honestly, the sequel, I wasn't sure how it could compare or what would happen next. And I thought it was just such an excellent example of how you can combat toxic masculinity. There are other, like Darius is in a relationship and he's playing soccer, and complex things are happening with his family and lots of interesting things are going on, but just like the way that Darius and his father interact with one another is one of my favorite relationships between 2 male characters in probably any book that I've ever read. And obviously it's a father-son relationship. I'm talking about that type of like supportive, loving, familial relationship. So that's great. And Adipharam just came out with a new book this year, Kiss and Tell, which is about a boy band, and the main character in this band that's on tour ends up falling for one of the people in the band that they're touring with, but that person has some interesting opinions about boy bands in general, and that leads to some tension, but it's also a really cute romantic story as well. Then I have to recommend this author. I know that many of you will have heard of him, but he deserves a place on this list, and that, of course, is Adam Silvera. They Both Die at the End has been on the bestseller list for months and months. It's a huge hit on TikTok. Everyone knows about it. It's fantastic, etc., etc. And I do love They Both Die at the End, but Adam Silvera has written many other books that are also great. So I really enjoyed History Is All You Left Me, a contemporary story about a boy who was dating someone who ended up dying and dealing with the aftermath of that and different relationships with different other people who knew this person. Like many of Adam Silvera's books, it is not the happiest, but it's a really good story. The main character in that story also has OCD, so there's another intersection of marginality. And probably my favorite books that Adam Silvera has written are Infinity Sun and Infinity Reaper, which are urban fantasy books set in our world, but in our world there are people who have magical powers, and some of them got them like by inheriting them, and some of them got them by taking the blood of magical creatures and doing some sort of magic spell that is not really ethical or allowed, and there is conflict between these 2 groups, and it turns out that the main character in these books ends up being like the chosen one, and he has a twin brother who is jealous because he has always wanted to be the chosen one, and they have to work together to stop some bad guys. And then there's a big thing that happens at the end of that one, and book 2 follows up on that big thing and other things that happen in the aftermath, and I can't give any more details without spoiling it, but they're excellent. You should definitely read them, as well as More Happy Than Not and Here's to Us and What If It's Us, which he co-wrote with Becky Albertalli, another favorite queer author, though not one I'm going to talk about today. So yes, I have gushed enough about Adam Silvera. I will move on to the next author, who is Anna Marie McKemore. So they are quite the prolific writer. They have written a lot of young adult novels. I will have a picture of them up here, and I will also tell you, not in chronological order because I honestly don't remember. So they have written When the Moon Was Ours, The Weight of Feathers, Wild Beauty, Lake Lore, The Mirror Season, Blanca and Roja, and Dark and Deepest Red. And I know that they have another book coming out that I believe is a Great Gatsby retelling. Don't quote me on that because it might be a different classic, but it's through, I think Macmillan has that series of like classics remixed, and I'm pretty sure that Anna Marie McKemore is writing a Great Gatsby retelling. So the thing about their books is that many of them are fairy tale retellings or retellings of some sort, but regardless of what the books are about, or if they're an actual retelling, they all seem and feel a little fairy tale-esque to me. I believe that all of them incorporate elements of magical realism, and they all have that sort of lush fantasy, fantastical feeling to their world. So I honestly, magical realism isn't really my thing, so I don't know which book to recommend most to you, but I would say the ones that sound the most interesting to me are When the Moon Was Ours and Wild Beauty. But I think that if you enjoy those types of books that incorporate magical elements into the real world and have that like otherworldly, ethereal fairy tale feeling, then you might want to check out Anna Marie McKemore's books. So the next author I want to talk about is Lila Lee, who has written 2 young adult books, I'll Be the One and Flip the Script, and both of them have queer main characters. So I'll Be the One, Sky, the main character, is bisexual. She does end up with a love interest who is a boy. Do not quote me on this, but I'm pretty sure that he is also bisexual, but again, I read this book a while ago, so I don't remember. And Sky is competing in a competition to become a K-pop star, and that's where she meets her love interest. The newest book that Lila Lee has written just came out recently. It's called Flip the Script, and the main character in this book is starring in a new up-and-coming K-drama and trying not to fall for one of her co-stars. I don't know how the main character in Flip the Script identifies, but I do know that the romance in it is sapphic. So both of those are things that we should definitely read during Pride Month. I am looking forward to reading Flip the Script this month. So my cat has just joined me. I don't know if you can see her, but if you can hear any sort of rumbling, purring sound, that is her, because of course, if I am trying to record something, she needs attention. That's a tangent. Let's talk about the next author on my list, who again is one of those big names when it comes to queer YA books, but I feel like I can't let a list like this go by without mentioning her, and that of course is Melinda Lowe. So Melinda Lowe is really well known for her sapphic Cinderella retelling called Ash, but she has written in so many different young adult genres that you can pick and choose your favorite and find something by her to read. You might want to check out Adaptation, which I believe is a dystopian trilogy. If you're more interested in mysteries and thrillers, you can always check out A Line in the Dark. I personally have Last Night at the Telegraph Club, which is, of course, her National Book Award-winning historical fiction book set in San Francisco during the 1950s, on my TBR for this month. So again, if you haven't read Melinda Lowe yet, I don't know why not, and put her on your list. The next author I want to talk about is Adiva Jaigirdar, who has written The Henna Wars and Honey and Issue's Guide to Fake Dating, and she has a new book coming out soon. I don't know, I think next year. that is called A Million to One and is a heist novel set on the Titanic, which I cannot tell you how excited I am to read that. The description doesn't mention anything sapphic, but the main characters are a group of girls, so I have to imagine that there will be a sapphic relationship. Both the Henna Wars and Honey and Issue's Guide to Fake Dating do feature sapphic relationships, and Honey and Issue's Guide to Fake Dating obviously has the trope of fake dating in it, which I absolutely adore. And the two main characters in that book just have so much personality. It's a wonderful book to read. I laughed all the way through it. I thought it was great. I have not read the Henna Wars yet, but I know that other people really recommend it, so I feel confident telling you that if you are looking for a sapphic book, then that would be a great one to check out. And the final author that I wanted to talk about today is Kailyn Barron, and she wrote the fantasy retelling Cinderella is Dead, which of course you can tell from the title is a Cinderella retelling, but the main character is queer and likes other girls. And then she has the fantasy duology, This Poison Heart and This Wicked Fate. This Wicked Fate comes out this month, so happy Pride to all of us. This Poison Heart was one of my absolute favorite books of 2021. I don't have a lot of fantasy books that are like all-time favorites, but this one, I believe when I first read about it, it was sold as a Secret Garden retelling. But honestly, I think that the fact that the main characters' like roots trace back to Greek mythology, and a big part of the story is learning that like the stories you hear about Greek gods and demigods are part of the main character's heritage and ancestry, and that is really interesting. But also there are just such strong like cottagecore vibes. It is such a good book. It has a sapphic relationship at its core. There are lots of queer characters. There are lots of feminist themes. It's just excellent. And I am about a third of the way through This Wicked Fate, and it is stressing me out a little bit, but I can't wait to finish it during this month's Pride. So that concludes this list of young adult authors who are queer and Black, Indigenous, or people of color that I really think you should read during this Pride Month if you haven't already. So let me know if you have a favorite book by one of these authors, if there is another author you would recommend, and I will catch up with you later.